Hello, Ken Spriggs here with part 3 of my Moebius 2001 Space Station V build. A lot of progress on this video as well. A lot of this video is constructing building the back construction ring. I'll call it the construction ring because it's under construction. A lot of work on that ring. I think somebody said over 200 parts on that. A lot of tiny little parts, a lot of little subsections that you're building at the same time. So I'll go over that when I get into those, but definitely working to get that together and get it painted the reddish brown that we see in the film, and a few other things that I began working on and completing too. So all right, let's go ahead and take a look. All right, so I got a second coating of the flat black on the ring. Certainly more light blocking, but still quite a ways to go. And originally I was testing it with a 9-volt battery, and it looked a lot better with the 9-volt. So I wanted to make sure I hooked it up to the 12-volt supply, because that's going to be what it's going to be running on. And so that's obviously going to be brighter and more steady brightness. It's not going to lose it. So still quite a bit to go, but not terrible. Certainly getting there. And the thing is too, I don't have to completely light block it with the black, because I'm going to be painting gray over top of this. What I'll probably do, what I did with the with my first test, was to do a neutral gray, so I'm not fighting against the black, and then over that probably just do some white until I get it to the right light gray that I want it to be. And I'm not going over as much. Obviously I can't miss it, but I'm not completely coating the spokes, and I'm not doing the other parts of the ship at this point, station at this point, the central hub or the whole other sides yet, because none of those are lit up. They're only going to get one coat of the black, and then I'll end up putting like one coat of the black over these spokes when I'm done. And that way, these aren't going to get quite as much on it, and I don't have to really worry about doing that. What I'll probably do is put on the final details, little fine details on this before I do this, to get a coat of black, because the idea is that the whole station has to be one homogeneous color. And so I've got to kind of do that all together, so I get the right light gray that I want it to be. And the only way to do that is to paint it all at the same time. I can still keep the parts separate, like the back parts of the ring and everything, before doing that, and then put them together. So let me go ahead and get another coat of black on. I think one more is probably going to bring it to where I need it to be, and then I can go back in and start doing the grays on it. All right, so after the first two coats, I went back in, I put the lights on it, and I took some Tamiya flat black, and I just brushed it into all of the little grooves that were really bright, that were obvious. These little areas here, just in all the parts that were not getting the paint by spraying it. So then I put a third, after that dried, I put a third coat of the Krylon rattle can, just about there. When I first plugged it in, I was looking up at this part, and I'm like, my light isn't working. And I looked at the adapter, and the light was on it, and then I realized, oh no, it's working. It's just not light coming through. But there are a few spots, like right here, also on the back. There are some spots. Nothing major. So I think one more light coat, and I try to keep it light so it doesn't pull and get too thick. But one more light coat on some of these areas should finish this up. And also on top of this, I'm going to have a neutral gray over the whole thing, and I'm going to have some white. So there's going to be more paint. So I don't have to absolutely 100% block it, but I do want to get these more obvious spots right here. But I think that did a good job. I did have to, like I said, the little brushing part was important because the paint just was not getting down into these grooves. So what I would do is paint this and this around here, and I would do along the edge. There's a little groove along the edge that wasn't getting the paint, but now it's looking pretty good. All right, so let me go ahead and move on to the construction ring after I'll get one more coat of paint on this, like I said, and then we'll start working on the construction ring itself. All right. All right, so I started working on the construction side. So I went back and forth on deciding how to do this. The first thing I was going to do is just leave these sections, leave these off before I painted it. Now I don't need to light block any of these. I just have to paint them black so that they will then get the grays to look like the front ring. But the problem is I don't want to really paint these first and then put them on. And I really hate trying to glue painted parts onto, styrene plastic. So I decided to go ahead and connect them together and figure out how that's going to work. So it will be a little bit tricky, but I can get back into there either with a brush or with an airbrush and paint those the red parts, and then just mask it off and do the rest of it. Or I can ultimately just paint the black around the parts I want, come back over and do that. We'll see. We'll see how it's going to work. But this is really, really challenging, this part of it. So many tiny little parts that you have to glue onto these ribs. This section isn't even done either. I have most of it done. There's still a part on the bottom. There's a part on the top. I think there's a few other little pieces that go onto it. And then I ran into a problem. A lot of this has to be assembled in a certain way, or you have to do a little bit of modifications. So initially, I started with this piece right here. And here it is right here. I ended up having to dig it back off carefully without damaging it. Did a little bit of damage on this one, but it should be okay. So here's the problem. So you have these parts right here, and you have two large ones, two small ones, or actually, let me see. Yeah, there's two large ones that go up here because this isn't out as far as these. So these are large and these ones are smaller. And what happens is this little piece right here goes into that part right there. Here's the problem. You're supposed to do these first. You're supposed to glue these onto them and then put them together and put that piece inside there, because the problem is down in there where that's supposed to go down inside around that rectangular part, it won't go in there because it's too tight of a fit. So I tried sanding it flat a little bit, still didn't want to work right, so I ended up just cutting off the two pieces right there, so I just had these two ends. Because what has to happen, so these are on the inside, these little nubs. This piece has to go all the way up to that nub, so this little end piece has to go down inside of that part, which is now being blocked by that part in there. So when I cut that off, I'm able to glue it in there, and they still have a pretty good bite right there on the rest. So you can see how I had to dig out the other one. and then start over again. And you can see that that part is still down in there. So what I'll have to do with the part that I had to cut back out, I'll just have to trim off the ends so they fit back in. And the way I discovered it before I started doing the other ones is that I got out the find the right one here. Is it this one? Yeah. Okay, so I got at this part right here. So this has the little nibs as well, along with these upper rings. They have to match up with this. So these parts have to match. And the problem I was running into is when I put this onto here. See if I can do this with. Sorry. When I put this onto here and it matched up on the other end, these little rungs here were not matching up. And so I realized that these parts were not in far enough in order to line up with it. Quite a bit of parts that have to go together exactly the right way for this to work and for everything to fit together correctly. So it'll work out. I was able to get this back out. I'll be able to get it trimmed down, get it back in the right way. But for the time being, I went ahead and I finished that one, and I'm working on this one right here. And I did the same thing. You can't really see in there, but I trimmed off the edge so that these will fit in there just fine. And these ones, they just go right into the edge of this. They don't go inside like the other ones do. Okay. Tons and tons of work. So let me go ahead and keep working on this and get these put onto the construction side. All right, just about finished with the construction side. Working on this last section. I want to make a few observations to kind of let you know. First of all, one of the things that Lou Dalmaso pointed out, these little nubs go on the inside. It's really hard to tell from the instructions. All it says is, be careful of the proper placement. It doesn't show you a close enough picture to tell you that they go on the inside. But the purpose of them is to line up the all the little pieces and parts that go down inside. So for example, something like this. So this little teeny edge goes up inside those two little ridges, and it meets up with these two little pieces, and it hangs down the bottom. You can see some of the examples right here. Okay, another thing I pointed out, unless you connect these rings inside of these parts before you glue the halves together and put the inside parts, you're going to have to snip off the inside edge. So you just have two parts going inside, sort of like this. This is a different part, but sort of like that. So you snip off the middle part, so you just have these two ends. They have to go inside, and you have to go all the way in. Otherwise, you're not going to have these in far enough. And then when you put these parts on, they're not going to line up, because these also have those little nubs on top. which do the exact same thing. They line up with all of these parts right here. So if you don't have them in the right place, that's not the right side. If you don't have them in the right place, they're not going to match up. So very important that you get those in right. Then a few of the things where I had a few difficulties. You have this little part here that has the little grate looking thing. It has these little teeny nibs on the end. So these are supposed to go into parts like this. You have those three little lines. I noticed that one side of a part, see, that's not quite as opened up as this side. So this side goes in pretty good and clicks in. The other side, really, really hard to do. So sometimes if you put some glue on it and press it in, it's kind of lubricates it and gets it in. Sometimes I actually cut these little nibs off altogether if I was just having trouble getting them in. And some of the parts, they go into, let's see if I can find an example here. Right there you can see there are some even shallower squares that they're supposed to go into. So for some of those, I just sanded them off altogether. They were just too tricky to get them to go in. And again, they have to line up. Same with this part right here. So this part has a little bit of a lip. What that's designed to do is when you put it in between, it comes underneath and comes up to that little nub. So it's very tricky. Just kind of play with them, test the parts before you put them together. Make sure you understand the right order of putting them together, as I mentioned and other people have mentioned, because this is very complex. Now somewhere along the way too, there's so many different sizes of these. It's like 47, 48, 49, 50, 51, 52. They're all very similar. You got these bigger ones, you got these smaller ones. Somewhere along the way, I was trying to find one and didn't find it, so I probably switched one out. It's okay, it's not a big deal. They all look very, very similar. And the thing about it is they're random, so you're not going to have everything finished. All of these are not exactly the same, so it gives it that idea that it's being built. I tried to keep it as accurate to the instructions as I could, like you can see right there. One's totally open, one has little solid parts, some other ones are even different. A lot of different pieces that go into making these. The nice thing is a lot of them are interchangeable, so it's not a big deal if you mix up one. And there are some extras, like these are extra. Some of these are extra. So, but a few of them are not. A few of them, there's only like 2 of them. Just kind of pay attention and watch what you're doing. All right, let me get the last little sections done. And I still don't have any of the outer piping like this, or the inner ones like this. What I think I'm going to do is go ahead and begin doing the painting of the girders first with the red, because I have to get into some of these spots. And then once I get that going, then I'll start adding additional parts, paint them on. And then I can just easily mask these off and just do these afterwards to do the black and then the gray. So, okay. All right, so one more adjustment I had to make is because these are all individuals, it was very tricky to get them aligned correctly. They weren't as noticeable until I put on the girders. Then you notice that some of them are a little off. Like this piece here was twisted this way a little bit. And the way I was kind of eyeballing it is to hold this up and compare it to like the station edge and that kind of thing. make sure it looks straight. So this one was off. This one over here, these two look good. But this one is a little too high up. It needs to go down a little bit to make it more even. And I'm just afraid that when the whole thing's rotating, it's going to be more noticeable if you have something off that's crooked. So what I ended up doing was I used my Plastric Bondine, and I dabbed it along these connections, and I removed these parts here on this one and on this one. Put those aside. And then this one, both of them actually, I took this pull saw and I cut off the connection right here because I could not break that loose. This one I glued back in place. This one is loose right now. So what I'm going to do is put some glue on it, hold it into place, keep it flat like this on a flat surface so I can compare the height of it to these other ones. It doesn't have to be perfect, but I just want it to be closer than what it is. So I ended up getting this one straighter. It's just slightly higher on the right side than it is on the left, but I think that might be partially because of this, because this has to go down. If that goes down, it pulls this one down, and that should correct it. That should correct that as well. So what I'll do is I'll put some glue onto this connection, hold it down in place, and then get them right where I want them to be. And that way I have all of these nice and even, and all of the construction rings even as well. So very tricky to do for sure. Not sure how these got out of whack because these parts are rather keyed. You just want to be careful. Perhaps some kind of a, put something down on a flat surface that these rest onto to get them lined up. I'm not sure. But in the end, what I should have done is I should have been eyeballing them as I went. And really, I should have put these on too and went that direction. But so many different ways to put this thing together, but it is definitely a complex part of this kit. But no problem. I'll get it fixed up and I'll get it straightened out so that it looks good. One other thing I did, you probably saw in the other pictures, is I painted the interior of this red. The back isn't glued on yet, and I'm going to paint that red. But I need to put a hole in it for the steel tube that's going to go in through it. You're not really going to see this, but I thought, why not? Why just leave it white plastic? Why not paint it red? Because this is the construction side. This is the one that actually goes into this one, and it'll be red. But it's going to be back against the base, and it's going to have the rod in it, the tube in it that's going to move it. So you're really not going to see it, but it was no big deal. It's just a rattle can of some red that I threw onto there. So no lights or anything in this side over here. All right. So I started painting the construction rings, and I just started with, to me, a flat hull red. And then once I did a first coat of that, I went back over just lightly misting some regular Vallejo Model Air red into some spots. I'm not completely done with it just yet. I do want to just get a little bit of variations in the color to make it look more natural, and in scale I may even consider a little bit of oils, like some rust colors and oils, that sort of thing. So definitely happy with the approach that I took. There's a lot of approaches you can take on this, and I'm not putting down any particular one. Different people, some people painted the parts before gluing them together and then went back and cleaned up where the glue removed the paint. Someone else mentioned that they painted the parts and then they scraped along where they connected, which to me sounds like a whole lot of work, before gluing them. And then obviously I did it this route. There are still parts to go on. There are still ring parts that go along the top, along the bottom. They fit into these little grooves, and those little grooves underneath there. And I'm gonna have to check. I know this part is red, and I first saw that on Wayne Green's video, so thank you, Wayne. I didn't realize I was going to make that gray, but I noticed he painted this red, and then I went back and looked at the scenes from the film, and it is indeed red. It's kind of hard to tell because it's moving, but I believe this whole section is red. I don't think the outer part is gray, although it looks almost like a finished panel. We'll see. I'll watch the still some more and see what I want to do with that. But I did go ahead and put the window masks on previously. I'm not going to light these, but as I mentioned before, and Lou Delmaso mentioned, you want those to still be white plastic underneath the gray to look like they're just windows that are turned off. So I did that first. And I did obviously get overspray, but it's not a big deal. Once this is all dry, I'll mask off all the parts that I need to stay the red. And then all this will just be painted flat black to start. Just one coat. And then I'll be doing the same blending of the neutral gray and then white to bring it up to a light gray color, like I'll be doing on the rest of the station. So it'll all be even. So I'm going to have an even look the same tones. So I mostly want to try to do that when I have all the station parts ready to go, so I can match them up and they look correct and they blend together. So that won't be a problem at all. Any overspray of the whole red or red isn't going to make any difference. It will all be covered up by black. And then from the flat black, I'll be, working up the lighter tones. So none of that will be an issue. All right, so I'm going to let this all dry. I went over it, and then I looked at it, went over again just to make sure that I didn't miss any little spots. And I really didn't have much trouble getting back into those little recessed parts. I just had to hold it from different angles, like spray from this angle, spray from the bottom, spray from the other side, and spray from the bottom and the side, just to get up into all of that. Let me get in here. Sorry. Can't really get a good focus. Sorry about that. But, let's not do that. But I was able to get a nice coating inside of there. And since none of this has to light block, it didn't matter if it was completely coated, just so that it looks red. And even so, too, that top you're not going to see, the bottom you're not going to see. They're going to be covered with additional parts. And I'll put those parts on and get those painted as well before I do any of the rest of the painting. Because on these parts here, a section of this has to be gray as well. So, for example, this part right here. So part of this will be gray and part of this will be the red. So what I'll do is glue these down, paint the red the way I want them to be. And these ones actually I could do first because they're, well, we'll see. Again, it's the whole gluing issue. I don't like gluing painted parts onto painted parts, even though these are painted. I'd rather leave this clean, get it on there. And then once I get it on, I can head back over and paint it red, and that's not a big deal. And then I can mask off this piece here that's going to be attached, so that'll be painted gray along with this part. All right, so I think that worked out well. That was an easier approach, and I think it was so much easier for me to glue all of these dozens of parts onto plastic onto plastic, and no cleanup needed at this point. That would have been a lot of cleanup, because every one of these little teeny connections, and I had to be liberal with that glue to get it over there. I would have just messed up the whole paint, and it would have been just repainting it anyway. So, okay, so I'm gonna let this dry for now. Then I'm gonna go back over, and I'm going to probably glue on the other parts next, and then we'll start doing some additional weathering and coloring to finish up the construction rings, the construction parts themselves. All right, so I glued on several more parts. I glued on all the inner parts. You can see where there's still white plastic. All the way around. Now this part right here, so I'm not sure if I made a mistake or if it's supposed to be that way. Obviously that one doesn't have one going to it, but that looks fine. I'm not worried about it. All the other ones, the bottom, the inner, bands connected up, but it would be fine that there would be one that wasn't. So, all right, those were quite tricky. I had to, each of those end pieces have to glue in place as well. Actually, that one's a little bit off. I might have to fix that. Plus, you have to glue that piece down into there and fiddle with it. All right. Also, what I did was I glued all these little thin bits up on top, the outer edge. Those have to go on first before I put the outer rings on. Now, what I'm going to do now is, before I glue on the remaining parts, I'm going to go back in and I'm going to paint these and these outer parts with the red, or with the hull red. Then you have these four that go on the outside, which I can paint afterwards, and all of these little pieces. So these ones, and I followed a little trick that Lou Dalmaso had told me about. So the way these are supposed to work, you have these two little holes, and they're supposed to go, you can see inside, it's kind of right down here. They're supposed to go over those two little pegs right there. There's two on each side, and go sideways. So yeah, it's really super tricky to do that. So what he suggested, which I did, and I'll do it on this one too, is just snip out those openings. So the way they're going to work is, there's two different sides. It's just two different parts. They're just repeated. And it goes inside there, and then it goes down onto this and glues over top of that part right there. And of course it glues down flat. Now the problem is, if I do that, I'm going to enclose that part. It's going to be hard to get paint in there. What I might actually do is I might glue down one side. That's probably, well, these might be the only parts that I have to paint first before I put them on. Just because even if I do one side and then paint from the other side, how am I going to get the other one? So I'm still going to have to probably do that. So what I'm probably going to do is have to paint these, get them glued in place once I paint the rest of this. And then I can still put these parts on top and then do a painting of those. So let me think about this for a second. Yeah, see, it's very tricky because I have to get these painted before I put those other bands on top. So I might just go ahead and do some paint first and then put those in place. But yeah, definitely a whole lot of parts. And yet again, just like the other parts that I did, this took me probably a couple of hours. A lot of it was cutting out all these little pieces, cutting out all these little teeny strips. I think there were 16 of these, and sanding off the teeny little nubs from the sprue, cutting all these out, cleaning them up, and then getting everything glued on. Yeah, it's definitely a lot of work, some very involved work. So let me go ahead and get some more paint. I'm going to have to do these in a couple layers and get this all put together. All right, so all of the parts are onto the construction ring, with one exception, the very fine wire-like strips that go along these. I'll do those later on when I'm ready to do the black and the gray on this main part. But I have all the parts on the construction ring itself, I believe. So the last of the parts are these white ones here still. Now, I did paint them on the inside, as you can see, through the other side, since those are enclosed, but I didn't paint the outside. And I glued them all in place. So the last thing I have to do is go over those, airbrush the outsides of all of these. I need to get some more Hall Red from Tamiya. I use the whole entire bottle and a little bit of another bottle to do all of this. So, and then what I've started doing is, I mentioned on Facebook that I was going to be doing some weathering, and somebody had asked about it and asked me, you know, they thought that the station looked rather new and wasn't really weathered. So I'm not really doing any weathering like you would think, like Star Wars kind of weathering. But I am going to give some variations to the colors because it gives it a better scale. So I've been using this Tamiya Orange Rust. And I've gone over a few spots. I don't know if you're going to be able to see it very well, but it just adds a little bit of contrast to the Hall Red. It just brings it up a little bit. And once I get those painted, I'll go over the whole station with it and just give it a little bit of contrast from just the one color of the of the Hall Red. I do have some Vallejo Hall Red, but it's not the same color as the Tamiya. It's a lot more on the red side. So I thought about maybe airbrushing just a little bit here and there, but we'll see. I think the weathering powders will do just fine. And I have some other colors that might work as well with it, so I can add a little bit of contrast. All right, but that's going to complete the construction ring. So basically the order that I did this, I did the main rings with all the little parts glued inside of the main rings first. And then I went in, once they dried, I went in and airbrushed and got inside the little sections in here and got a coat of the Hall Red. Then I went back and I put on those little rods right there. Sorry. These two little rods right here, because they were going to be covered by this top strip and the part underneath. So I put those on. And what I actually did was I just used a brush and I just painted these with the Hall Red because they were just some tiny little parts. Then I put on this top outer strip along with all the inner strips, all of these. And then put a second coat of paint over top of those and all these, because I can get inside of those. Then these parts, I painted the inside, but I left the outside unpainted. These are the ones that I showed you that I cut out a little bit so they would fit inside over the little pegs that are there. And there's actually 4 extra ones of those, which I didn't use, because this part doesn't have them. There's no place to put them. And then I glued all those on, and then I'll do my final painting over top of these on both sides and just pick up any little spots where I missed any of the paint. I can also go back with a brush if I need to and pick out little parts that need to be it. But I think that's a good approach. Build it in stages and paint it as I go. And then the final thing, like I said, I'll be doing some weathering with some weathering powders to kind of bring out a little bit of variations and some colors there. All right. So this is done for now. Once I get those parts done, then I'm going to mask off the parts that I don't want to be painted, and all the rest of this will be painted black, flat black. And then I'll be ready to do the neutral gray and the white to bring it up to a light gray with the rest of the station. So, okay. But a ton of work. Probably put a solid 12 hours over several different days into this, if not more, getting all these little parts. So you definitely want to pay attention to the instructions. They are very complex. And you can see They break down the 4 different sections and all the tiny little parts that go into it. So you want to pay attention. You want to make sure you understand how it fits. And they all fit together, so you have to be careful. Obviously, all of these little bits go into the little nubs on the side rings. Then the top rings and the bottom rings have their own little nubs that also fit into those parts too. A few of them, maybe 2 or 3 parts, I made a mistake, obviously, and I had the wrong part. But it's okay. It doesn't affect the way it looks. It still looks cool. And you have certain sections that don't have anything overhanging them. But, yeah, but just watch the instructions. A lot of different, very similar parts that have different part numbers. So, okay. All right, but looking fantastic. All right, so that's going to wrap up the video for this part here. As I said, I got a lot accomplished, a lot done with that second section of the ring. So I'll get that all finished up here shortly, and then I can start working on masking off the reddish brown beam section so I can paint the rest of the station the black. Before I do that, I do have to get together the other parts that are going to house the steel tube because I want that all to be attached together before I start doing any painting. And then I have to paint that along with the front ring so I get them all the same color gray. But I'll be going over that in the next video, and also working on the base and how I'm going to attach it to the motor and that sort of thing there too. So, okay. Well, thank you to all my new subscribers, and I will see you in the next video.